All right, so we are going to dive into is this an okay tone? Okay, we're good. I'm going to talk like this the whole time. I know you've been sitting all day, so let's just get right into the weeds of creatine and magnesium. We're going to talk mostly about creatine, then magnesium. So just background and perspective, I've been doing this work for about 20 years, since 2006, working in the dietary supplement space. I started a podcast in 2014 called High Intensity Health. Now, in my free time, my daughter and I like to spend a lot of time exercising in the mountains, and then for my business life, I also own a dietary supplement manufacturing facility. So I'm coming to this through the lens of an athlete, but also on the raw material side. And so we're going to talk a lot about different qualitative forms of creatine, magnesium, and things like that. But I really want to focus on creatine because this, in my opinion, is the most misunderstood nutrient that's out there. Who here currently takes creatine? A handful of you, which is awesome. There's a lot of misconceptions about what creatine does. People think that creatine is only for bodybuilders, only for athletes. Creatine is vitally important for affecting cellular energy production. So when you think creatine, think energy within your brain, within your retina, within your muscles, within your heart. And for those of you who want to have a child, the placenta, creatine is really important for women of all ages, especially pregnant and lactating women, because it turns out, have you heard about mitochondria today? A few people have talked about mitochondria and energy production. So this is as complicated as we're gonna get today. Very, very simple. ATP is the cash in your body. When you leave here and you wanna buy coffee, you wanna buy dinner, you use cash or currency, your card. In your body, when you move your muscles, when you squat, when you think, you are using ATP. It's the currency of the human physiology. Well, it turns out, this is creatine right here. Creatine is a mitochondrial supportive, conditionally essential nutrient. Without creatine, it's really hard to make ATP, really hard to make cellular energy, which is why it's so important for brain health, for vision, for pregnancy, and for exercise, particularly high intensity, short duration, explosive type exercises. Creatine essentially offers a pool of phosphate that can help you. When you exercise, you're constantly going back and forth, making ADP, which gets phosphorylated back to make ATP. Creatine helps provide a buffer. So again, when your neighbor, when your spouse, your business partner says, oh no, creatine's for athletes, say no, creatine helps your cells make energy. Okay, so really important. Now let's get into the nuts and weeds on this. Of course, your body makes creatine from 3 amino acids, methionine, arginine, and glycine. Creatine is made in your liver, but it's also made within your brain. The problem is these amino acids here, arginine and glycine, are usually found in animal-sourced foods. And there's a big push to move people away from animal-sourced foods towards plant-sourced foods. So people are not getting the necessary amounts of the rate-limiting amino acids to make creatine, which is why many people have a functional deficiency in creatine, which is a problem because creatine is so important, as you just learned, for cellular energy production in your brain, for your eyes, and your muscles. So in order to get enough creatine for your entire body, you should be having north of almost a pound of red meat per day. So if you do not eat significant amounts of red meat, you will have a functional creatine deficiency. So plant-based dieters, vegan dieters, people who are trying to avoid red meat or saturated fat because of fear, unfounded fear, I might add, of cholesterol and heart disease, you should be supplementing with creatine. Now, it turns out there's only one company here that offers creatine. I just had 10 grams before this talk. It really helps, especially in context of jet lag and sleep deprivation. So just a small little side note, for those of you who have young children, anyone have young children at home who are getting you up in the middle of the night, creatine can be your best friend because it will help you the next day function. And for those dosages, which we'll explain later, you want about 20 grams. And there's actual research to support that. For depression, 20 grams. So higher dosages for a shorter period of time. So again, here's ATP. This is the cash in your body. Creatine is foundational for helping make ATP. And this will be the last time we kind of dive into the weeds on this. I just want to help you better understand creatine makes energy. It doesn't cause hair loss. It doesn't necessarily inherently build muscle. It's not just for bodybuilders. It's inherently and vitally important to cellular energy production. Okay. Tons of research is coming out about creatine for having anti-inflammatory effects within the body, for helping with methylation in the body, So you've heard earlier today about mold toxicity and detoxification and pregnancy and so forth. Well, creatine's really important for methylation as well, and it might have anti-inflammatory effects. And it turns out that creatine might have subtle pro-anabolic effects by inhibiting myostatin, which of course can slow muscle building. And so creatine is really important as you get older. That's the other thing. It's important for kids too, but especially elderly folks as well. Now, why are we talking about creatine so much? Because it turns out that strength is a vital sign. Strength is a vital sign. We go to the doctor, we get our lipids tested, we get our cholesterol tested, we get our blood pressure looked at, but how many people have been to the doctor and they say, hey, what's your grip strength? How much can you squat or deadlift? These are actually really important clinical questions because as you get older, you lose strength. And strength loss is independently correlated with adverse outcomes as you get older, particularly all-cause mortality and cardiovascular specific mortality and even mortality from cancer. So strength really matters. That's why we're talking about creatine. It turns out that a good approximation of whole body strength is grip strength. So does anyone here do farmer's carries? These are really good. Dead hangs on the pull-up bar, those are really good to improve whole body strength. I see one hand, awesome. I'm sure more of you do it, you're just being shy. But grip strength is really important, and it turns out that as you lose grip strength or strength overall, that is correlated and associated with poor biologic aging. So we have chronologic aging and biologic aging. We can't control time, right? We just gotta manage our time, but we can control our biology. And that's why I'm such a huge fan of creatine, because it helps you have a better workout. And if you have better workouts, most people are gonna be more compliant and consistent with exercise. That's the big thing. So if you have someone that goes to the gym and they're getting iteratively or progressively stronger, they're more likely to make exercise a habit. And so I love using creatine intra-workout and pre-workout. However, I recognize that the audience is more than 50% women. So let's talk about creatine for women. Tons of research supporting that creatine is especially important for women of all ages, particularly peri and postmenopausal women. Because it turns out that estrogen influences a critically important enzyme known as creatine kinase. And so, of course, during the menopausal transition, estrogen goes down and we see a functional deficiency in this really important conditionally essential nutrient known as creatine. So creatine is also important for bone health. We hear so much women going through menopause have osteopenia, osteoporosis, so creatine is important for bone mineral density. Hydration, there's a company out there selling electrolytes. I think all electrolytes should be paired with creatine. Creatine helps draw water into your muscle cells. When we talk about hydration on a cellular level, we're talking about really helping to increase intracellular hydration within muscle tissue. And so creatine works with electrolytes. So just a small little practical tip, when you take creatine, please don't take it with your coffee in the morning. Take it with electrolytes before or during your workout. Exercised muscle increases the absorption and utilization of creatine by about 25%. So you don't need to take super high doses, just time your creatine right. Bring it to the gym with you, take it beforehand. You can dry scoop it in the parking lot of your car or the bus, whatever you want. But you wanna take it around exercise and with electrolytes. Now creatine, because it helps support hydration, it makes electrolyte supplementation more effective as well. All right, so really important stuff. This is what I wanted to share here. Basically, strength is a vital sign. And so creatine is part and parcel with strength. So that's why I think it's really important that we optimize exercise and we look at conditionally essential nutrients like creatine to help with that. Now we're hearing so much about mental health. I live in the US, and I'm sure you've seen the viral videos of people picketing in the streets and breaking windows and doing all these things. So mental health is something that we should all be concerned about. And it turns out this was a study conducted by scientists in the UK, finding they randomized people who were already doing cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is just basically talk therapy for depression. And they also had an intervention group that was advised to take 20 grams of creatine per day. The group that took 20 grams of creatine per day concurrently with cognitive behavioral therapy had a significant reduction in all sorts of mental health related issues, anxiety, depression, feelings of suicidal ideation and beyond. Because why might that be? Well, it turns out that creatine is so important in the brain. And we know that an energy deficiency in the brain can create depressive-like symptoms in individuals. So it's really important for those of you, and I know today's like the first real gnarly weather day. I mean, I don't know if some of you suffer from seasonal affective disorder, but during the winter time, you might want to bump up your creatine if you do are prone to more sour moods because of the weather. It turns out that there's research showing that creatine supplementation can be helpful in the context of Alzheimer's and dementia. I know you heard Max Lugavere probably earlier this morning talking about the nutritional elements to help optimize brain health. Creatine is really important for optimizing brain health, and several studies have actually shown that creatine supplementation, short-term high dose, 20 grams per day over the course of 2 months, can help individuals with Alzheimer's and dementia. So creatine, really important there. I think I have the study on the next slide. But I love to recommend creatine for people over the age of 60, and I know we get a lot of kickback. My parents are in their 60s, and they think of, greens juices and salads as superfoods, and I'm constantly pushing them to take creatine because they're not getting enough creatine from their diet. Their doctor is telling them that red meat will give them cancer and heart disease, so they're eating salads and soups, but they're not getting enough creatine. But it's really important, and this study actually highlighted how creatine should be used for people of all ages, all genders, especially people over the age of 65, because they're not getting it from their diet. You need at least 1 gram of creatine per day, 1 gram from food, okay? Most people, there's an NHANES study in here somewhere that we'll get to, finding that the average American is consuming 500 milligrams of creatine per day. So that's why most people are functionally deficient in this conditionally essential nutrient. Okay, so it turns out this was a consensus statement paper saying that, creatine should be recommended for all walks of life, from infants all the way up to elderly individuals, for all of these different reasons. And as I mentioned, the placenta, we talked about the brain. Creatine is really important for energy production within the brain and the retinal cells, the heart, obviously, muscle tissue, but the placenta. Think about it, we're building a new human being. And so it turns out that for women, creatine is really important because developing a human being, it turns out, demands a lot of energy. And children, in fact, when you look at, you've all heard of MTHFR or polymorphisms within genes that affect methylation. Most of the inborn errors in creatine metabolism affect developmental processes within children. They manifest in the brain. So there are different genes that affect creatine synthesis from arginine and glycine and so forth, and they affect children and their brain development. So creatine is really important for children. I've been giving my daughter creatine for a long time around exercise, and I think it's helped not only her athletic performance, but also her ability to play piano and do cognitive intensive activities. This was the study. You may want to take a screenshot if you have anyone in your family who has mild cognitive impairment, memory loss, or dementia. This was the study looking at how it's an analysis, I think, of 15 or 20 different studies finding that creatine helps support memory and cognitive function in adults. Okay, really important stuff. We're almost halfway through, so we don't need to get into the weeds on all this. But I'll give you the slides at the end. I'll show you how to get to that through my website. So if you want this for your own research, that's fine too. This was an Alzheimer's disease pilot study, randomizing people to a placebo group for 20 grams of creatine, finding after 8 weeks, creatine improved various aspects of executive function, which is important. So the prefrontal cortex, really important. So you can see here the baseline and levels, memory tests, brain creatine levels increased significantly after this 2-month study here. Important stuff. Creatine, it turns out, improves blood flow in the post-meal window. So I think this is really interesting because we hear a lot about reduced blood flow and poor circulation. During the wintertime, people have Raynaud's, cold hands and feet. Creatine is a tool that may increase circulation and blood flow. This is important in the context of erectile dysfunction, obesity, diabetic complications have reduced blood flow. All right, so why are we talking about creatine? Well, it turns out we're not eating as much red meat as we used to, at least here in America and also Europe as well. There's a big push towards a plant-based diet, sustainability issues, and beyond. So we're not consuming as much red meat as we used to. So this is why we should be recommending more creatine supplementation. Of course, it's tacitly implied that we should be getting most of our nutrition from food. I'm not here saying creatine supplements are all we should focus on, but most people are scared of eating red meat, and you're not getting much creatine from chicken, from seafood, from plant-sourced foods. And so that's why I do recommend supplementation in this context. Creatine is a carnonutrient. There's all sorts of great nutrition from red meat, from carnitine, carnosine, creatine, zinc, vitamin B12, folate, and so forth. So this is just one of many carnonutrients. I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill about creatine, but it turns out there's a lot of good research to support it. Now, this is what we see in America. You know, people are scared of red meat, but they eat all of these cereals and grains and pastries and so forth, which of course have none of these nutrients that we're talking about today, the carnonutrients, particularly creatine. So creatine, really important for anyone who's been on a plant-based diet for any length of time. And it turns out that young people are not eating red meat nearly at all. There's a lot of young folks in their 20s and early 30s who are eating a lot of chicken, and there's really no creatine in chicken. So if that's your main protein source, you probably have to supplement or eat more red meat, okay? This is the slide I was kind of telling you about. You know, let's see, it's 7 in the morning my time. I got up at 2 in the morning my time. I flew in yesterday. So today I tried to take a lot of creatine. In the morning I took 10 grams before this talk, because research shows that creatine actually helps prevent or offset sleep loss-induced cognitive decline. So we've all had a crappy night's sleep before, and we all know the consequences of that. Your memory's not as good, you can't focus, your attention span is not that good. So you can use creatine high dosages short term to offset that and to offset jet lag. Like when we think about jet lag, who travels with melatonin? Some of you. Okay, please start. If you love melatonin for jet lag, you should also bring creatine with you, because it can help with jet lag induced, preventing cognitive decline linked with jet lag. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, people I think in the US are overdoing creatine. I know some people are taking 30 grams a day in this. You don't need to take that much, especially if you pair it with electrolytes. And so this was a study that just randomized people to take 5 grams of creatine with electrolytes. So with electrolytes, we're talking about sodium, magnesium, and potassium. There's this creatine transport protein in your body, and that is contingent or dependent upon electrolytes. So ideally, you could just take 2 to 5 grams of creatine per day on most days. Now, if you have jet lag, if you have memory issues, you're going through menopause, you've been a vegan for a long time, you can do a loading phase of 1 week long, 20 grams of creatine in divided doses, and then back down. But the maintenance dose is 2.5 to 5 grams per day. Okay, so you don't need to supplement super high dosages forever. Quality does matter, and we'll talk about quality in a minute. Okay. Now again, this really matters, especially for those of you that exercise. I know we've all gone to a HIIT class, we've gone to the gym, and we start out strong, and then our muscles are burning, we don't have enough energy. That's usually because your body only stores 80 to 100 grams of energy or ATP in your muscle tissue, an entire body at any given time. Creatine offers a pool, it's a buffer. It's like, okay, here's the potential energy, the phosphate, so that when you deplete this ATP, I just did some sprints before this talk here. So I depleted a lot of my ATP. So that's where creatine comes in. It helps replenish that faster, so you can work out harder for longer, and that's how it's able to maintain and build strength over time. Okay. Now, is any endurance athletes in the room, any ultra marathon or ultra runners? Okay, some of you. It turns out that that energy system doesn't really depend upon the phosphagen system, so creatine doesn't totally translate into improved performance in marathons. But when you go to sprint, like if you're doing that, I did a 5K 2 weeks ago, and there was a sprint finish, so I just used my creatine system during that sprint. So it can still help you, especially with hydration and explosive movements if you're into ultra endurance events, but it's mostly gonna help during shorter periods of exercise. From 0 seconds up to 60 seconds, that's where creatine really helps. So if you go to the gym, you do weightlifting, you do CrossFit. Is CrossFit popular in Denmark? Okay. High rocks, is there a high rocks coming? Does anyone do high rocks? Some of you? Okay, so creatine would really help with high rocks training, by the way, because that's very explosive and it depletes a lot of ATP. Okay. Just a quick plug on this. So creatine enhances cellular hydration, as we already talked about. So when you're traveling, when you're on an airplane for a long period of time, Dr. John Kim was talking about last night how that affects magnesium and calcium balance within your cells, and that can be dehydrating. So for those of you, who go out to the bars, right? And you have a hangover remedy, those often have taurine and electrolytes. They should have creatine, because creatine will help with hydration as well. I'm not endorsing binge drinking, but some people still do it. And so you should definitely take creatine the next day. Okay, so here's just a summary slide about the different types of creatine and big areas where creatine may help. As we've already talked about, a lot of mood, memory, and cognition, sleep deprivation, and of course exercise, and the transition from into postmenopause for women. Now, when it comes to creatine form, the most widely studied form is creatine monohydrate. You don't need to get a lipolyzed creatine. You don't really need to leverage creatine hydrochloride. There's not much research to support that. It turns out that there's two sources of creatine in the world, two real areas of the world where creatine is made, either in China or Germany. And it turns out that the Germans really know what they're doing. The folks at Alzchem Biotech make one of the purest creatines out there, and they are your neighbor, so I would definitely recommend looking for that. It's known as Creavitalis or Creapure. That's the raw material. And there's different companies that sell that raw material. And having a dietary supplement manufacturing facility, we've looked at the creatine from China versus the creatine from Germany. It's night and day different. The way that it dissolves, when you third-party test it, there's two contaminants, dicyandiamide and dihydrotriazine. These are two contaminants often found in creatine because the calcium carbide to make creatine comes as a byproduct of coal manufacturing and burning. And so in China, there's not as much regulation, so these two impurities are often found in Chinese source raw materials. So go to your favorite supplement company and say, hey, where are you getting your creatine from? Because you want to make sure that it is really low in these two contaminants that I think do matter over time. If you just take a cheap creatine from Amazon, let's say you buy it at a big box store, probably not that big of a deal 1 or 2 times, but if you're going to be doing 5, 10, 20 grams of creatine for a long period of time, I would recommend getting the highest quality stuff. It's not that much more expensive. Okay, side effects. People are always worried, well, creatine is going to cause my hair to fall out. There was one study in rugby players, they had them take 20 grams of creatine for 8 weeks, so a pretty high dose for a long period of time, and they had a placebo group that didn't take creatine, and the group that took 20 grams of creatine had an increase in their dihydrotestosterone, DHT. DHT is a derivative of testosterone known to affect the follicular health in the hair. It didn't exacerbate hair loss, but people took that study and made a bunch of YouTube videos and said, see, creatine causes hair loss. How mechanistically would it do that? Remember, creatine improves cellular energy production. Hair follicles need cellular energy just like any other tissue in the body. There was a small increase in DHT, probably because this group increased their strength and performance from the exercise and the creatine supplementation. So when you exercise harder and longer and get stronger, your anabolic hormones increase. So that doesn't translate into hair loss. In fact, this 12-week study enumerated hair follicular health. They looked at hormones. They did all of these different analysis under a micrograph and found zero evidence that high-dose creatine causes any changes in the hair follicle itself. In fact, some of the images and I can't interpret these microscopic images of the hair follicular health, but they actually improve the health of the hair follicle, the creatine group. So creatine doesn't cause hair loss, just don't really worry about that. A lot of people can misinterpret research and so forth. Okay, so when you get creatine, you can get it micronized or unmicronized. The micronization process just improves the water solubility. So if you have gastrointestinal issues, you have a sensitive stomach, maybe you've had antibiotics or proton pump inhibitors or whatnot, you might want to get micronized creatine because it's much more water soluble and it's less likely to cause gastrointestinal distress. But the Creapure material, I'm not sponsored by them. I do have a supplement business. That's my conflict of interest. But you can buy this raw material from anyone. You don't have to buy it from me. I'm just giving you an idea here. It's much more voluminous, and it actually tastes better. So if you want to mix this in your electrolytes or a smoothie, the micronized material tastes better. So I would recommend starting with that and seeing how it goes and then moving to the unmicronized version. So the micronized version, this is just ChatGPT. You can figure this out yourself. It's basically more water soluble, less likely to cause gastrointestinal distress, which is the main side effect of creatine. So remember, you want to take it with electrolytes or around exercise, If you've been a vegan or vegetarian or don't eat a lot of red meat, start at a higher dose, a loading phase of 20 grams per day for about 7 days, and you can back down to 2.5 to 5 grams per day. You don't need to do these super physiologic dosages for an extended period of time. All right, we have exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds to talk about magnesium. Magnesium is really important as well, and it's interesting that we wanted to weave these topics together because it turns out that magnesium is so important for that same molecule that we've been talking about since the start of this conversation, and that is ATP. Without magnesium, you cannot make cellular energy. So magnesium is a really important mineral. It's a cofactor for over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body, and this is arguably one of the highest impact journals, at least in the US, the New England Journal of Medicine. Mainstream medicine is finally catching on to the fact that magnesium is critically important for so many different physiologic functions, and most people are deficient in magnesium, especially if, and this is the way I eat too, a low-carb, paleo/carnivore style diet. We're basically getting almost no magnesium in our diet if we eat the way that we should be eating. And so I think that's kind of a problem for a lot of people because magnesium is just so important for a lot of different functions. It affects, as I mentioned, cellular energy, brain function. Really good research to suggest, along with magnesium L-threonate, there's different forms of magnesium that we'll get into. It does affect synapse function within the brain and synapse health. It also affects calcium homeostasis within the brain. So obviously for hangovers, jet lag, sleep deprivation, the parallels and the clinical applications of magnesium are very similar to creatine because they function similarly, helping cells make energy. And so this is a really, really important mineral that I think most people should be taking. And the cool thing about magnesium is it's really cheap. And there's a great raw material supplier called Sinopharm in Belgium, right near you all, that makes one of the best magnesiums in the world, known as magnesium acetyl taurate. Magnesium acetyl taurate. This is a relatively newer form of magnesium, but the research is really compelling, and they're your neighbors, so I would recommend looking at that source as well. But here's the thing about magnesium, and there's kind of two things that I wanted to just drive home for you all. Basically, we pee out 100 milligrams of magnesium every day. So if you're not getting at least 200 milligrams of magnesium, you're basically losing more than you're getting in. So most men should aim for north of 400 milligrams of magnesium per day from food or supplements. And most women, especially pregnant or lactating women, should have at least 350 milligrams of magnesium per day. Now, I'll share with you the food sources here in a moment of where this comes from, but it turns out that as we get older, we filter out more magnesium. Our kidneys are better excretors of magnesium, which means we're more likely to be functionally deficient in magnesium as we age. So aging is a clinical symptom of an increased need for magnesium. If you don't eat a lot of fruits, vegetables, and grain products, you probably have a magnesium deficiency, and it's really important for bone health, for skin health, for eye health, for memory function, sleep, electrolytes, and beyond. So there's also metabolic effects of magnesium. Blood pressure is a really common symptom in the US, increased blood pressure, poor vascular tone. Obviously, chronic inflammatory conditions, there's pretty good research to suggest that magnesium works like an antioxidant and can reduce oxidative stress in the body. Magnesium, as I mentioned, supports metabolic health, so insulin sensitivity. So last year, we talked all about metabolic health on this stage, and magnesium is really important for metabolic health. And what I love about magnesium is it's really affordable, really affordable. We'll talk about forms in a minute. Research does show that magnesium affects body composition. So a functional deficiency in magnesium, a symptom of that could be weight gain, poor body composition, increased fat mass, and so forth, hormonal function, the list goes on. Now, why are we talking about magnesium? Because most people are not eating these foods. Can you see this? I know it's hard. I'll tell you how to get the slides in a moment. But we're not getting and we're telling people to avoid whole grains, right? Because they're high glycemic, they're processed. In the US, they're sprayed with Roundup and who knows what other chemical, right? Atrazine and so forth. So the very foods that we're telling people to avoid, because they are oftentimes components of ultra-processed food, tend to be higher in magnesium. And so you don't see red meat on here. I just talked about how creatine is found in red meat and eggs and so forth. So this is why I think magnesium supplementation is important, and it's really affordable. So let's talk about the different forms and what that might look like. Okay, so the forms that you want to avoid, because they're not that good, the bioavailability are magnesium oxide and magnesium citrate. Poor bioavailability, and actually there's a case for magnesium citrate. If you're constipated, magnesium citrate is so poorly absorbed, it will help you have a bowel movement. That's the thing about it. So when you see a multivitamin or a supplement that has magnesium citrate, that's good to help you go to the bathroom because it literally draws water into the colon and helps you defecate, but it doesn't increase intracellular or whole body magnesium levels. So the way that you want to think about magnesium forms is this. Magnesium malate is good for your muscle. So think malate muscle. Magnesium glycinate is good for the entire body, but it probably has the best bioavailability of all the different magnesiums from a whole body perspective. And the two forms that I really like, for the brain in particular, because we talked about creatine, are magnesium L-threonate and that magnesium, it's called acetyltaurinate from Belgium. And so that's what I would recommend. So again, whole body magnesium glycinate. For those of you who are athletic, the high rocks trainers that raise their hands, the ultra marathon runners, the CrossFit athletes, magnesium malate is great for your muscles. It can help with cramping. And for the brain, you have magnesium L-threonate and magnesium taurinate. And again, the company is in Belgium. I just had their little thing here called Sinopharm. And so this is something that you may want to, you guys can see my screen. You're going to hear a lot more about, and I'm not getting paid by them at all, but no conflict of interest here. But this, it's called ATA-MAG, magnesium acetyltaurinate. And it's actually a little bit, the research on it is a little bit better than magnesium L-threonate for brain health because it's bound to taurine, think carnitine and acetylcarnitine. So this is magnesium acetyltaurinate. And so it actually is more fat soluble and may help increase intracellular magnesium levels in the brain. And there's actually pretty good research by this group for helping women during their menstruation, during their cycle, when there's cramps and uncomfortable cycle-related symptoms, the magnesium acetyltaurinate may be helpful for that. Okay, we're 2 minutes over, but the slides, if you would like, so my business is Myoscience, and if you go and opt into our email newsletter list, it's myoxcience.com, myoscience.com, or you can direct message me on Instagram. I'll send you the slides. And I make YouTube videos 3 days a week, so that channel is called High Intensity Health. And my Instagram is Metabolic Mike. And I'm just grateful that you are all here, and thank you for tuning in. And if there's time for questions, I would love to hear from you all. Thank you.